Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, my dear students. In the current session, what I'm going to talk about is Germanic conquest and Anglo-Saxon civilization. What I'm aiming at is that at the end of this lecture, you would be able to understand what was the historical role and what was the significance or importance of the Germanic conquest. How did it impact the history of English language, and how Germanic conquest and Anglo-Saxon civilization played a role in setting the stage for English to take over later on at some time point. Well, my dear students, if you trace the history of any language, and for that matter, if you trace the history of human existence on earth, what you would realize is that no conquest, no rule is forever. Rulers, groups of people, inhabitants, they all keep on changing. No area is ruled by the same ruler forever. The older ones are conquered by the new ones, and when the new ones take over, their ways of living, their lifestyle, their choices, their civilization takes over the inhabitants' lifestyle and their living. When we talk of the history of English language, it is very important for us to understand that though Roman conquest and Roman civilization played an important role, but it was not forever. It was, of course, contradicted, clashed, resisted, and finally replaced. And what it was replaced with was Germanic conquest and Anglo-Saxon civilization. If we look at the course of the history, what we would realize is that year 449 was a significant year because this was the time that gave a new direction to the history of this island, which later on led towards the development of English language. Invasion of Britain by certain Germanic tribes, the founders of the English nation, happened in the year 449. When I say happened in this year, I mean it started in this year. Otherwise, this is a long process that takes decades and centuries to happen. So almost for 100 years, groups of people, bands of people, tribes of people who were from the Germanic origin, they would keep on traveling to this land. They kept on settling here and, establishing themselves here. If we try to trace the history of this migration that happened, we do not find a lot of records of that. In fact, the events of those times, they are all wrapped in obscurity. They are not very, very much clear to us. We only, however, have a general idea of what would have happened, that these groups or tribes would have entered into this land and would have settled at certain places. However, who exactly were these tribes? What were their exact locations where they came and settled? What were exactly the dates on which they traveled and came and settled? We do not have any knowledge of all that. Account of the Germanic invasions actually goes back to Bede and the Anglo-Saxon chronicles. And what we understand is that mainly the Germanic tribes that conquered today's England were three types of tribes: Jutes, Saxons, and Angles. My dear students, what I want to show you is here if you look at this map, this is the map of the England of those times, the times when these three types of tribes came here. If you look at the map, you would notice the presence of Saxons here, the presence of Jutes here, and the Angles here. So these were the areas, precisely 1, 2, and 3, where all these tribes came and they settled. You have right now seen the location of these tribes, the Germanic tribes that came and that actually invaded this area and finally got themselves settled here. Of course, these tribes brought a lifestyle with them, and the Anglo-Saxon civilization was a very, very strong civilization. Relations of these newcomers and the native population, if we look at them, what we would realize is these people were people who were less civilized. These were very crude kind of people. These were the people who would live a very free life. Where the inhabitants were few, these Anglo-Saxons settled down besides the Celts peacefully, but of course, anywhere where Celts would be in a greater number, it was not possible and there was resistance. So, what we can notice is that in the West Saxon territory, they met resistance and there were fights and they had to, make a lot of efforts to overcome the local or the native people. In the West Saxon territory, when they met all this resistance, of course, in that particular area, their placement was lesser. Many of the Celts went to West and sought refuge in Wales and Cornwall, and some immigrated across the channels to Brittany. So, because of these dual, or the binary forces of the powers of these two types of people that were working against each other, there were certain migrations that took place. Anyways, the result was that the Roman influence was largely destroyed. I hope you already understand that Roman civilization, being a great civilization, gave a certain lifestyle with, all those furnished houses and paintings and mosaics and good water supply system and a very civilized way of living to the people of this island. But all this was not destroyed. Why it was destroyed? There were certain reasons for that. The Roman towns were burnt. Town life did not attract these people. These people who were now the invaders, they were crude people. They were the people who would live life in, the wild, in the open. So, because they would do hunting and agriculture, they were not interested in civilized life. These now small tribes, they combined together. These small forces, they would come together to make bigger tribes. And what was the purpose? The purpose was to get a kind of strength by being united, by being combined. B, to come under a certain ruler who you see now would look after them or would protect them from any dangers. In this way, there were 7 main tribes that emerged. I'm just going to share the names of those tribes with you. Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, Kent, Essex, Sussex, and Wessex. These are the 7 tribes whose names you would come across very frequently whenever you would read the history of English language, because out of these were the people who became the first people of the England of the times. However, I would say that this grouping was not permanent, and whenever, there would be fights, so Group A would go to Group B, or some people from Group B would go to Group C, and these tribes would keep on changing their loyalties, and they would keep on changing their, affiliations and their links. But these were the, kind of main tribes that were existing at that time. In early 7th century, Northumbria gained political supremacy over a number of other kingdoms and held an undoubted leadership in literature and learning as well. As we move on in history, we realize that in the 8th century, this leadership passed to Mercia. So what I'm trying to say is that, at different time points in the couple of centuries of their existence there, of the time we are talking about, because of the power structures or because of, the political strength, leadership would keep on changing from one tribe to another. Finally, in the 9th century, Wessex, under the guidance of Egbert, that is from 802 to 839, began to extend its influence until in 830, all England, including the chieftains of Wales, acknowledge his lordship or his powership. So this was one of the times when, a comparatively bigger and a united, rule emerged. Well, I would not say that the result of this was what we may call United Kingdom today. No, it was not. But, West Saxon kings claimed to be the kings of all the English. And what I would say is that this was for the first time ever in the history of England that, there was one major rule where one king or one major ruler was ruling all the area.